we should aspire, but aspire within, after taking, I would say, a realistic assessment of where technology is likely to be in the next 20, 30 years. So there has to be a certain amount of realism built into it. But certainly, I agree that agility is going to be the key. Sir. Things are changing that rapidly that it would be it would be essential for us to keep our ear to the ground.
But the key is here that perhaps in some spheres we are reaching a dead end in technology.
Yes,
So
sir.
should we seek help? Should we buy technology? I mean, that's the key question that we need to face these days.
It's truly an honor for me to welcome Admiral Arun Prakash in our first edition of what we are calling the Dabbling Dialogues. In these dialogues, our intention is to discuss a wide variety of topics, anchored in security, of course. And I would say there would be a bias towards the maritime domain because that is our strength area. And we will be discussing topical issues and other issues I think that concern us and all seafarers. So, for a start, I thought we will start with the recent visit of the Charles de Gaulle to Goa, sir. This, if I'm not mistaken, was a 42nd edition of Varuna. I think the carrier was here in harbour for a few days. I did not get a chance to visit her. I don't know whether you had a chance to visit her.
Nor did I.
So our relationship with France has really matured over the years, and I think France also has been quite a key player in the Indian Ocean area. They were the first country to roll out an Indo-Pacific strategy in 2019, and they have also appointed an ambassador for the Indo-Pacific. They have a base, as we know, in Djibouti. So I just thought if you could tell us a little bit about the genesis of Varuna and what really are France's interests in the Indian Ocean regions.
Well, that's a very interesting and topical question because you have to look at it at a macro level and then look at the micro level, which is the exercise Varuna. At the macro level, France has a lot of interest in the Indian Ocean. In fact, France possesses one of the largest, or possibly the largest, exclusive economic zone in the world, strangely enough.
Yes.
And in the Indian Ocean in particular, they have territories in La Réunion and Mayotte Islands. So they have a specific interest in the Indian Ocean and they consider themselves an Indian Ocean power. And of course, France also has visions of itself as a great power internationally speaking. As far as Indo-France relations are concerned, they've been exceptionally good and stable for a very long time, right from the independence. When we were seeking armed military hardware, of course, UK was the logical place to go to, but France very readily supplied us fighters, tanks, and other helicopters, right. So etc. So our relationship with France has been exceptionally good. And the crux came when we tested our nuclear weapons in 1998, where the whole world was condemning us, but France stood by and almost applauded it. They've also supported our membership of the UN Security Council. So given all this background at the macro level, it was only logical at the military level we should work with each other,
right.
both countries. So Exercise Varuna dates back to the early part of the century, I think around 2000. And as you said, this is the 42nd version of Exercise Varuna, where both the navies meet each other. They look at each other's tactics and deployments and learn from each other, what we call interoperability. So these exercises are held, I think, alternately in the Indian Ocean and sometimes in the Mediterranean
Right.
off France. So they are mutually beneficial, mutually supportive of the two countries, both at the political level and the security level. And as you again pointed out, France, considering its status in the world, issued an Indo-Pacific strategy a few years back. So they do consider that they have a role in this part of the world, and as a friendly power, I think we should welcome it.
So, as a follow-on to that, anything you can tell us about the Charles de Gaulle itself? I mean, insofar as carriers go, of course, it's nuclear powered and quite compact. Anything more you would like to add about the platform itself, sir?
Yes, Charles de Gaulle is an interesting platform in the sense that France is one of the few countries, 5 or 6 countries in the world, which owns and operates aircraft carriers.
Right.
They have been able to launch only one aircraft carrier, and this is a nuclear-powered aircraft carrier. It happens to be almost the same size as our own Vikrant, 45,000, right. Around that. So it's an interesting platform for us because we are also now discussing whether we should go into the third aircraft carrier or not. And if we are going to do that, then this would be a good template for us to follow. Another issue of interest is that the Indian Navy is also looking for a new aircraft to equip its aircraft
Right.
carriers. The MiG-29K has been with us for some time, but I think it possibly outlived its utility. So amongst the candidates is the Rafale,
Yes.
which is operated by Charles de Gaulle. So Charles de Gaulle being in India, operating the Rafale, and the platform itself being present here is of great
Right.
interest to the Indian Navy. So I think it's a very fortuitous circumstance that Charles de Gaulle has come
Right,
at this
sir.
particular time.
Right, sir.
But speaking of aircraft carriers and so on, I think we need to also focus our attention on what's happening with our northern neighbor.
Yes.
China is already has 2 carriers out at sea. A third
Yes, sir.
one is following. And you are a keen follower of developments in China. Can you throw some light on their latest endeavors?
Yes, sir. Firstly, of course, going back to the carriers which they're already existing, so you mentioned two, and the third one I think just came back from a 6th round of sea trials, maybe last week, if I'm not mistaken, or earlier this week. Interestingly, there were tire marks on the flight deck this time, so possibly they've either done touch and goes or maybe even traps in the last sortie that they've done. So. But the big ticket event, of course, which took place on the 27th of December, was the launch of the first Type 076. Quite a unique platform. Firstly, I thought I'll speak a little bit about the yards. This has been built by Hudong Chonghua, and Hudong Chonghua used to be in Pudong, up the Huangpu River in Shanghai. So that is a slightly constrained area because the river is slightly, I'm not too sure about the exact draft, but certainly it can't build these large size vessels, and even the dry dock there was limited in dimensions. So here on Changxing Island, again in Shanghai, right next to where JNCX, another large yard which is located, they've set up a subsidiary facility, I think, which is going to become their primary facilities, where two large pieces of maritime infrastructure, one is a huge wet basin, and the other is a brand new dry dock, which is around 450 meters by 90 meters. So it's a large dry dock. This construction of this facility started, I think, in roughly around 2021, the middle of 2021, and may have finished by around September 2023. And just as the cement had dried, or largely, I think a more correct term would be cured, they started construction of the 076 within maybe...
Not the 075? The predecessor to this?
No, this is the 076, first of class. So when you compare this vessel to the 075, and this was recently launched, as we know, on the 27th of December. Sir. When you compare this vessel to her predecessor, the 075...
These are amphibious
yes, sir. So these are like an LHD. She has a landing dock, and plus she has a strong aviation component, which we'll speak about, sir. But when you compare it to the 075, the 075 is 250 meters, this is roughly 260 meters. So in length, they're just marginally, but in her beam is much, much more, sir. The 075 is 30 meters, she's around 48 meters, sir. So it's a huge, tremendous increase in beam. The overall configuration has also changed. The 075 has a single island. This is got a twin island sort of structure. Propulsion, I think, has also changed, sir. On the 075 was diesel, and here some reports are saying that this is gas turbine, and maybe gas turbine with integrated electric propulsion. But the big ticket changes are on the aviation side of the house. So if you see, I mean, firstly, of course, is a flight deck. It's a through flight deck, not angled. They've got deck edge lifts, two of them, unlike the 075, which had, centerline lifts. And the biggest change, of course, is EMALS, where they've got a single catapult mounted on the port side, which is of the same dimensions as that of the Fujian. So this, I think, is going to be, it puts China in a different spot, where largely, one critique about China is that they copy the West. But here they seem to have broken out from that mold, and they're experimenting and seeing what you can do in different classes and how you can mix and merge. So here you've got a unique platform with a well deck, which can take LCACs with a strong aviation component, which can probably launch, drones, GJ-11, etc. They're talking about these drones, and maybe even more. But I thought, sir, since if you could tell us a little more about EMALS as a concept, sir, as to how does it change as compared to a steam-driven catapult, and what will bringing drones onto a float platform, how will that impact warfare at sea in the years to come?
Well, it's interesting that you use the term mix and match, because the Chinese seem to be doing it quite well. They have two objectives in front of them. One is to project A2AD against America, as a deterrent for any American invasion or so on. And the other objective, of course, is reoccupying Taiwan.
Yes.
So this kind of a platform, amphibious assault vessel or a landing platform dock, can be used now. The way they've configured it, it can be used in both
Yes.
objective. Taiwan, Operation Taiwan, and against the Americans. The EMAL that you mentioned stands for Electromagnetic Aircraft Launch System.
Right.
Now, historically, aircraft carriers or aircraft operating ships have used a catapult, which was generally a steam operated, steam catapult. Good piece of equipment, but very complex, difficult to maintain, prone to breakdowns and so on. So, about a decade ago, the Americans innovated this EMALS, which is an electrically driven mechanism which launches aircraft. It is it can be calibrated to the exact weight of the aircraft being
Right.
launched. It imposes less stress on the aircraft airframe. So it has proved itself to be a much more useful, and it's less prone to breakdowns and simpler to maintain, etc. Of course, it requires a huge amount of electrical impulse for the ship to generate. So now, an EMALS was first installed on a US aircraft carrier, Gerald Ford,
Yes.
I think few years ago, but they had a lot of teething troubles with it. In fact, at one point, I think President Trump said that we should discard it,
Yes.
but they didn't discard it, they've kept it. But to everyone's shock and surprise, the Chinese suddenly emerged
Yes.
with their own version of EMAL. Now, whether they did industrial espionage or invented on their own, it's a considerable
Yes.
achievement. So I believe it's been installed on their third aircraft carrier. But installing it on an amphibious assault ship is a quite a unique
Yes.
thing. So what this will enable them to do is A, to launch, as you said, unmanned aircraft, unmanned combat aircraft, and B, if they so desire, possibly they can actually launch manned aircraft also. So here it's an ideal device because UAVs are much lighter
Yes.
than compared to combat, and this can cope with both heavy aircraft and light aircraft. So it's a huge option, huge capability that the PLA Navy has acquired for itself, and it's taken everyone by surprise.
If I could interject, sir, and actually maybe this is the advantage of a late starter into carrier aviation, which is allows them to sort of leapfrog past steam-driven catapults and jump straight into EMALs.
Yes.
But it speaks, I think, of the maturity of the program that they have this confidence also that they could, skip that entire stage
Yes.
and jump straight in here. sir.
Absolutely. Also, using you see, the fear is that aircraft carriers cannot afford to get too close to shore-based anti-air opposition. But if you're operating unmanned vehicles, UAVs, then you can stay offshore and launch them ahead of you.
Right.
That gives you, the aircraft carrier gets many more options. So it's a great. But talking about shipbuilding, etc., when they launched this 076, I noticed they also launched two frigates at the same time, which they didn't publicize very much.
Yes.
But quite surprising that three major vessels should be launched on the same day. You know more about this?
So you have to give the Chinese credit for this. I mean, firstly, so when they started with the 076 in October sometime last year, in 2023, last to last year, at the same time, they actually started constructing three more frigates at that time. So in August 2024, that is around 8.5 months into the construction period, they flooded that dock,
I see.
floated out the three frigates, and docked.
Semi-constructed.
No, they were. I mean, sir. I mean, these days when you look at a Chinese vessel that is being floated out for the first time, it looks,
Nearly complete.
80-90% fitted out, etc. So they floated them out and redocked the 076. And immediately after that, they started construction of two more frigates, and this would have been in August last year. And by come 27 December, while they were with the launch of the 076, those two were also launched. So it's a phenomenal construction rate, sir, where if you take the overall build period of around 14 months for the 076, they've done 5 frigates. The first 3 were done roughly, I would say, in around 8 to 9 months. But the second 2, 4.5 months flat, sir, from, lowering the blocks onto the dock floor to floating out the ship. Another unique thing, I think, where the Chinese have sort of done exceptionally well is on commonality, sir. So these are all 054 Alpha frigates.
Class.
Yes, sir. And some of them, I mean, these were initially all built for the Navy, but now they started using the same platform for the Coast Guard as well, sir. So this commonality of a single design, at least the weapon package might change and maybe some sensors might change, But if your basic propulsion train is the same, then it makes it so much easier to mass
Common
produce.
hull, common propulsion.
Yes, sir. So all that goes, and the numbers, of course, are astonishing. In the first round of the 054 alphas, they built 30. Sir. Then I think they built another 10 or 12 more, out of which 4 have gone, and plus 4 more for Pakistan. Now they've restarted again for the Coast Guard and for the Navy, where the numbers are not sure. So you're talking about a class of ships that might run into 50, 60 or something like that, sir, which is quite phenomenal, sir.
But a dismal fact is that when you talk about in terms of months for Chinese
Yes.
warship construction, we are talking about years where Indian
Yes.
shipyards are concerned. So can you put your finger on one or two factors which creates this huge vast void between us and them?
Yes, sir. So, firstly, I would say is that our yards where we are, you have to increase yard productivity. I must say that a lot has been done in recent times, but of course, the distance to go is large as well, sir. One is numbers, sir. I mean, if you build in 2s and 3s and 4s, it's always difficult to
But
streamline.
capacity, do we have the capacity?
So once you streamline the design, then I think repeat orders become cheaper and cheaper because you learn from one iteration to the next, and you keep refining this process until you get better and better at it. Also, our shipyards, sir, they were built largely. They all built in British times, except for I would say Hindustan Shipyard, which I think maybe a little later,
Cochin.
and Cochin as well, sir. Now, they are all built for making much smaller vessels. And therefore, if you have smaller vessels, which your basic slipways and dry docks, etc., if they're only
They're
designed for smaller
constrained for
vessels,
space also.
they're constrained for space and constrained for draft, sir.
Yeah.
Now, if you constrain for draft, then your launch weight cannot exceed X amount, sir. And we've tried some different ways of pontoon assist launch, etc. But if you see an Indian ship being launched, roughly you're looking at around 40-50% outfitting, sir. When I was in Washington as the naval attaché over there, we went for a visit to Bath Iron Works. And they told us, they were showing us the construction of Alibak destroyers at that time. And they said that if you want to put a piece of equipment into a ship, if you put it into a 50-ton module, and then that module sort of goes into a 200-ton block, that goes into a 1,000-ton block that gets mated with the entire ship. The cost is 1 is to 4 is to 1 is to 2 is to 4 is to 8. So,
geometrical progression.
Yes, sir. So if you want to put it into the ship, when the ship is finally constructed, the cost of doing that becomes 8 times.
Cumulatively.
Yes. So if you want to adopt modular construction, then there's a lot that needs to be done. And I think relocation.
So that is not only more economical, it's quicker.
It's quicker, faster, and of course, time saving. So it really helps in every possible way, sir. So, sir, I mean, apart from, of course, shipbuilding, another unique thing that the Chinese did, I think, towards the end of last year, was for the first sighting of the 6th generation fighters. So, from my understanding, is not so much about these aircraft, but what I understand that a 6th generation essentially means that stealth is a primary focus and does not have a tail, and essentially is a flying wing sort of formation. Could you enlighten us more, sir, as to what capabilities they're likely to bring, sir?
Yes, I mean, just like the 076, this so-called 6th generation fighter has also taken everyone by surprise. It's sprung it on the world. But this term generation is a bit of a fluid term, 5th generation, 4.5 generation, 6th generation. It's a subjective term. But generally speaking, aircraft, say up to the Rafale, say 4th or 4.5 generation. 5th generation requires essentially 2 or 3 attributes. One is stealth. It should be, difficult to detect by visual, radar, infrared signatures, sound, etc. It should all be as low as possible. Second attribute is it should have super cruise. Super cruise means that without going into afterburner,
Yes.
Afterburner shoots up your fuel consumption. So without going into afterburner, the engine has enough power for the aircraft to cross into the supersonic mode. So that is 2. Third is data fusion. The pilot is very heavily overloaded in aircraft. So if there can be some computer which can take data from radar, from infrared, and so on, and present it in a fused manner to the. So these are the 3 main attributes of what we call a 5th generation aircraft.
Right.
Now going into 6 means that you are now going beyond that.
Yes.
So more stealth means it should be very difficult. 5th generation can be detected by some kinds of radar. They say X-ray band or something can pick it up. But 6th generation should be totally. So they've done away, as you said, they've done away with the tail surfaces, which are
reflective.
Radar reflectors. So they've got a they've got other means of substituting for a rudder and a tailplane. Speed wise, they are saying, they are talking about hypersonic, maybe Mach 3, Mach 4.
Right.
Why and how? I mean, those are debatable issues. Then it would have directed energy weapons,
Yes.
which means large electrical output on board
Yes.
the aircraft. Perhaps it will, sixth generation should also be able to carry unmanned vehicles
Right.
or operate in company with, or direct,
Yes.
manage. So these are some of the attributes for sixth generation. So looking at this, what they have termed J6 arbitrarily, is a huge wing, flying
Yes.
wing, with very few projections, no surfaces which will reflect radar, possibly a huge weapons bay, which means all the weapons
Yes.
are inside the aircraft and no reflecting surfaces. Long endurance, it can go thousands of miles, and if it's hypersonic or Mach 3, 4, then the transit time is much shorter, vulnerability is much less.
Yes.
So it's a huge step forward. I don't know whether other countries have, I mean, Americans must have been thinking of it, but they haven't
Yes.
produced a prototype yet. So I can see the Chinese are well ahead of the competition. And also the fact that they displayed two aircraft.
Yes.
One is being called J36 and the other is J35.
Yes.
Both fifth, sixth generation. They are well ahead, and they have a grand, I mean, they've got a grand maritime strategy, obviously, from
Yes.
shipbuilding. But I think there's an equivalent aerospace strategy
Yes.
also in being and being implemented by them.
So would you say, sir, that I mean, to produce a flying platform of this nature, I mean, would require a Herculean amount of effort, I would say, before that to happen. But would you say that because of the development of unmanned assets and drones, you can collect a lot of your data through scale modeling, etc., and therefore this space of innovation that we're going to see in future for building aircrafts of this nature might sort of come down because of the ability to fly unmanned assets in that sense?
Yeah, I suppose that would help now. Things like AI and quantum computing
Yes, sir.
are all going to hasten. But I think the challenges to be overcome will also be equally, and the ambitions of designers and
Yes.
of soldiers and sailors will also increase. So I'm not sure, but certainly, well, jumping from the time from third generation to fourth generation and fourth to fifth have all
Yes.
been compressed already. So the point you're making is quite valid, that it will certainly compress time frame.
Of course, the other issue is unmanned, sir, in the sense that, of course, one report says that the sixth generation fighter is going to be optimally manned. So you can decide whether you want to fly it with a crew or you don't. So. But this entire concept of unmanned and unmanned aviation has been in the limelight, I think, recently, primarily because of Elon Musk. I think he was quite
Yeah.
critical of the F-35 program and saying it is foolish to go past, to be designing manned fighters today. So where would you see this sort of debate going, sir? And not really a debate, but in terms of capabilities as unmanned assets mature. Do you see the pilot becoming sort of obsolete in terms?
Yeah, I can see Elon Musk is going to be very unpopular with the US Air Force and
Yes.
US Navy, because
Yes.
there are strong lobbies which, not entirely for scientific or technological reasons, but sentimental reasons,
Yes.
are attached to manned aircraft, because
Yes.
there's no manned aircraft, no pilots. But I think manned aircraft will still continue to exist. Perhaps the ratio of manned to unmanned will change drastically. But one manned aircraft can control a dozen UAVs. Loyal, what do they call,
Wingman.
loyal wingman.
Yes,
So that concept, and that concept is applicable in all
Yes.
spheres of warfare. I mean, as you know.
Yes, surface, etc.
So I think manned aviation will continue, but in a most restricted manner, and probably step back, because again, when you send out a loyal wingman, he's going to face the flak and fire
Yes.
and get shot down. The manned aircraft will stay back, so that factor itself will dictate the proportion of manned to unmanned. But things are changing very rapidly, and one is fearful or apprehensive that we are getting left behind
Yes.
in the maritime sphere, in the aerospace sphere, etc. So, could you, with your vision, look ahead and sum up this situation as far as we are concerned in India? Where do we stand? Where should we go?
So, sir, this is, of course, future capabilities and what we should acquire. This requires, I would say, of course, we have to be grounded. We have to be. We should not jump into technologies.
the moon.
Yes, which are not really mature. I think a great example is the DDG 1000, the Zumwalt class, where they really attempted to leapfrog a long way out,
Yeah.
and they burned their fingers pretty sharply. The Americans, in that they were, you went for electric propulsion, you went for a different hull design, you tried to attempt a new type of gun that can fire projectiles to
You're
around.
talking about the U.S. Navy.
Yeah, U.S.
Right.
Navy says so. Therefore, I think even these are lessons that we need to learn.
Yes.
And see, we should aspire, but aspire within after taking, I would say, of a realistic assessment of where technology is likely to be in the next 20, 30 years. So there has to be a certain amount of realism built into it. But certainly, I agree that agility is going to be the key, sir. That things are changing that rapidly that it would be it would be essential for us to keep our ear to the ground.
But the key is here that perhaps in some spheres we are reaching a dead end in technology.
Yes,
So
sir.
should we seek help? Should we buy technology? I mean, that's the key question that we need to face these days.
I would say that in many ways, from platform centric, systems are becoming. I mean, warfare is becoming much more system centric.
Yes.
And in a sense, that is our strength areas. I mean, there was some reports a few years back that the prime contractors for future platforms are not going to be people like Lockheed Martin or Boeing, but are going to be Microsoft and Apple. And the platform will be outsourced to an aircraft manufacturer who will design it central to the softwares. So in that sense, I think there is a lot of promise that we have, because this is an industry that we're quite strong on. And as particularly, I think as we graduate towards unmanned, I think systems and software, these are going to be really software intensive platforms. And that's going to be the key. The easier part, if you ask me, would be to surround it with the system. Of course, in certain areas like jet engines and aero engines, of course, they're still quite difficult to break through into those areas. But moving ahead, I think there are green shoots for us also that we can exploit to make sure that we are
So
well
a lot
placed.
of meat and material for your future podcast, I can see.
Yes. So again, sir, I just wanted to thank our viewers and to thank you for participating in this. We will repeat this as frequently as we can, but not too frequently. But we will wait for your feedback to tell us and to guide us through this entire process. We are not attached to any other platform. We've created a platform of our own, but it's going to be highly interactive, and we look forward to your feedback. So thank you, sir, once again for participating.
Thank
and
you,
thank
Monty,
you, viewers, for watching.
asking me. Thank you.
Bye-bye.